3 new publishers. From Sydney, the latest from Podnews.net with Magellan AI. In Australia, 3 new podcast publishers were today announced to be joining the Australian podcast ranker. Here's commercial radio and audio CEO Ford Ennals.
I'm absolutely delighted to announce today the addition of 3 more great podcast publishers. Our friends from the ABC are going to be joining the Australian podcast ranker, which I think is very exciting. Let the battle commence. Alongside great titles from Shameless and also the Squiz.
He was announcing the news at the IAB Australia Audio Summit. Their CEO, Gayla Roy, unveiled the company's audio advertising State of the Nation report, which is available for download. That discovered 70% of ad agencies used podcast advertising regularly in 2021. That's up from 36% just 2 years ago. Spreaker has partnered with Music's Match to offer transcriptions for podcasts. Creators hosted on Spreaker will be able to automatically transcribe their podcasts, and it uses the podcast transcript feature to appear in supporting podcast apps. iHeartMedia brought in $113 million in podcast revenue in Q4 22. That's up 17% year-on-year, according to their latest financial data. Bob Pittman, their CEO, sees the changing podcast landscape as being beneficial to the company.
There's a certain rationality that's returned, which is good for us. Obviously, with our size and scale, if we're really bidding on product based on economics, we're in very good shape.
You can now embed YouTube videos in Transistor website pages, it's been announced, and iHeart has announced the Black Effect Podcast Festival on April the 22nd in Atlanta in Georgia in the USA. And in podcast news, in Decoder with Nilay Patel, Colonel Byrne from iHeart is a guest this episode. Patel asks Byrne about buying bogus podcast plays in game apps.
Are you doing that?
No, we don't.
You don't? You've never bought downloads from game ads?
We use June Group. We've talked with Ashley a lot about this. June Group is a vendor that drives marketing for podcast companies that's targeting mostly gamers. Whether those are gamers playing Subway Surfer or people who over-index for the metaverse. We have experimented with June Group across the years. I think our stats were something like never more than 2.5% of our downloads in any given month. We don't use it anymore.
In Moneymaker, Nellie Galan brings listeners her hard-won business advice, stories of how being an immigrant informed her entrepreneurial mindset, and actionable tips for listeners looking to grow wealth. It launches today on the Money News Network. Dynamic Doug is new from Project Brazen and PRX Today, looking at the strange tale of Douglas Latchford, the world's expert on Cambodian art. But where was he getting some of the stuff that he was selling? Wonderstruck is new today from Dr. Elizabeth Rovere, a clinical psychologist, and Up Against the Mob returns for a second season today from the Vox Media podcast and Cafe. In The Springfield Crew, host Eli Honig will revisit one of the most pivotal cases of his career. This podcast is sponsored by Magellan AI. How's the podcast advertising market looking in 2023? You should join their session at Podcast Movement Evolutions in Las Vegas on March the 8th at 11 a.m. And if you can't make it, don't worry. You can follow the link from podnews.net/latest to get the latest from their blog. And that's the latest from our newsletter. To read all the stories and subscribe, or at podnews.net.